Welcome to the NOSA Unleashed podcast, where we want to expose and remove the stigma surrounding mental health by discussing real-life challenges and obstacles that keep us paralyzed and fearful to move forward. Let us inspire you to believe there is more to life than what you are currently experiencing. Now is the time to end the silence and pursue the path to purpose and fulfillment. We will do this together because no one stands alone. Welcome back to the NOSA Unleashed podcast. I'm Laura Burgoyne, joined here with Walter Blackwood, who is actually part of our team at No One Stands Alone Foundation. And I'm so glad that he's joining me today and talking about this very important topic about anger. And it's often something that we don't talk about. We brush it under the carpet, we try to hide it, or, it's almost like things build upon each other in our day-to-day lives until the point where we just let it all out in unconstructive ways and harmful ways. And it's important that we learn, first of all, what anger is, how we can manage it, and what are some ways of doing that healthy. And so thank you, Walter, for joining me in this conversation.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited about this program that you've created. It's called Calm in the Storm. I've looked through it. It's incredible. And I wanted to talk to you more about it. I wanted to, pick your brain because this is something that you have, studied for a long time. You've applied it to your life. You've used it in a lot of the work that you do with the people that, you mentor in our nonprofit, but also in other spheres of your influence. And I see it in your life. I see it in how you manage even yourself. Like there's some circumstances where I even watch you and I watch how you, yeah, you don't know that I'm watching, but I watch
No,
you and how you are like responding to certain situations. And I think in my head, I wouldn't have responded that way. And I see you actively using your tools. And so I'm so excited to just dive into this topic. And the first question I want to ask you that you can just, share your perspective on for our listeners is, what is anger? How can you define that?
well, okay. Medically, what anger is, it's a psychobiological emotional state that's consisting of feelings varying in intensity from like a mild irritation to annoyance to intense fury and rage. And it's often accompanied by neurodocrine processes and an arousal of the autonomic nervous system. Now, that's a lot of big words, but all in all, what it is, it's a natural response your body has to a threat or a perceived threat.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, when we have that perceived threat and we're having that physical and biological reaction, the next thought is, well, how do we manage that?
Well, it's a process, right? There's different techniques that we can use. The biggest thing, though, is being aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, like I had a huge anger problem. The people that know me now see me as very happy and jovial and, always quick with a joke and a sarcastic comment here or there.
Yeah.
Um, just here or there, not all the time
Oh,
or
really?
anything. But for a long time, I had explosive rage. I would go from 0 to 100 in a split second. And one of the first things I had to learn was how to anticipate a trigger
Hmm.
and to get ahead of the problem. Once I learned what triggered me and got me angry, then I was able to uh, learn how to process it and how to identify what was a healthy anger and what was an unhealthy anger.
That's so huge. You
Yeah.
said you've learned how to anticipate the trigger. I think that's a skill set that many of us don't have. And I recognize that even in myself, that, you know, I do struggle with anger. And obviously I've gotten better with it. And I've been learning some strategies and tools, but um, you know, that just really struck me. I'm sorry if you were not done talking. That just like really stood
No, no,
out to me.
no.
And I wanted
Yeah.
to like just make a note about that because that was, it just really resonated with me that that is a amazing strategy if we can anticipate those trigger points, those things that normally, cause that reaction in ourselves that we can, work towards avoiding that and preparing ahead
Mhm.
of time to deal with it.
Well, another part of it is once you've started to identify the triggers is forgiving yourself.
Mm,
Because there's times where, I'll be reading or doing something and I deal with fibromyalgia and bursitis and a lot of other chronic pain issues. So I will occasionally just be grumpy,
mhm,
right? I'll be not thinking and somebody will say something and I'll bark, right? But it's very important that when you do something like that, you need to forgive yourself.
mhm.
Say, you know what? Yeah, I screwed up, but I need to let that go
Right.
and ask forgiveness for the person you barked at, and then not let that affect the rest of your day. Because Satan comes to destroy, and he's very happy to ruin your entire day by poking you in the side once and getting you to bark and then not forgiving yourself for it.
Mhm. Talking about that, when would you consider anger to be the problem, right? Because there, like you said, there are healthy types of anger and there are
Yeah.
unhealthy types. So when would you consider, our anger response to actually be a problem?
Well, different people are going to have different like levels of anger when it's a problem. Some
Okay.
people can be like really like intense and in the moment and very assertive in their language and still be able to bring themselves back. Other people, it's like a switch, like I used to be, where I go from calm to losing my mind.
Yeah.
And I had a fuse like this long.
Hmm.
So it's different for each person. But in general, I'd say when anger becomes aggression, it's
Hmm.
a problem. When it stops being about, you're, trying to defend yourself from a threat and you're attacking in response, then it's a problem.
So what would you then consider healthy anger?
Well, healthy anger, first of all, if it's appropriate to the situation, right?
Okay.
Um, I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
One of my nephews, one of your children today, started making some, offhanded derogatory remarks about himself.
Mm.
And I got mad at that. I didn't like that. And so I responded with appropriate anger. I said, I love you. I love my nephew. I don't want you talking about my nephew like that ever again, or we're going to have a problem.
Hmm.
He noted, okay, I crossed a line. He apologized, said he'd watch himself, moved on. That's healthy anger.
Hmm.
Unhealthy anger would be if I walked up and I backhanded him and said, don't you dare talk about yourself like that again.
Hmm.
Right.
Right.
So if you're trying to get back at somebody, that's unhealthy anger. Uh, if you verbally express what's making you angry and then you let it go, healthy. Screaming, yelling, kicking, not healthy.
Hmm.
Right. Um, Another one that people don't talk about very much is when you're angry and you hold it in.
Right.
That's very unhealthy because what happens is it builds up and builds up and builds up, and then somebody, like, the expression the straw that broke the camel's back,
Yeah.
that is for anger,
Mm.
right? I'll give you an example from my own life, um, of how that can happen. I would hold in my anger all the time. And this was actually after I wrote this program. So don't think that just because, I wrote this that I am immune, or that
For
if
sure.
you take Calm in the Storm, you're going to be immune to anger. No. So, about Lydia.
Yeah.
Connie and I were trying to adopt my niece, Lydia. Interprovincial adoptions at the time were a horrible process,
Hmm.
really, you know, clinical, and didn't take into consideration anything other than a checklist.
Hmm.
And I screwed up. I talked about some things from my childhood, and they started looking at it that way and looking at, well, me and my brother grew up in the same environment, so obviously we're the same problem, which isn't true. My brother isn't even really a problem, but that's neither here nor there. Fact is, I held it in, and other things that were happening, finances and job and everything else. I was holding it all in. I wasn't expressing it. I wasn't allowing it to be healthy anger, which is vocalizing it calmly and respectfully, letting it go. Um, so what happened was, I don't even remember what the conversation was about, but there was a straw. There was that one last little think on me, and I melt Vesuvius, just boom
Yeah.
everywhere, yelling, screaming, you know, going red faced. My head looked like a cherry tomato. It was not pretty. Finally, Connie went, and those of you who watched or listened to the podcast about relationships that Connie and I did, you've heard about the dish towel. We have a dish towel. We even have it hanging on our wall that we use for communication that allows us to freely communicate with each other. It's a whole process. She walked out of the room. I yelled at her for walking away. She said, "Shut up and wait." So I did. And she came back and she threw it at me, and I just broke down.
Mm.
And all my guilt, all my anger, all my shame came tumbling out. And I was able to release all of that pressure that was building up in me.
Hmm.
That is the result of unhealthy anger. That's the result of holding it in until it explodes.
Yeah.
You're not the same person when stuff like that happens. Right.
Yeah. I know for myself, an example of my life is probably 13 years ago or 14 years ago, I had a miscarriage. And when I
Mhm.
had the miscarriage, we didn't know we were pregnant. It was a terrible physical experience for me to go through. But Doug, my husband, was completely oblivious to any of the grief or the trauma I had gone through. And I felt no support and I felt no empathy or compassion from him. And I was so angry. And I held that anger in. And I held it in for a long time. And I found in me that anger didn't just stay anger, it became bitterness. Then it
Mhm.
became resentment. And it became, and then eventually I was like, I didn't even, and actually it turned into hatred towards him. And this was over the process of like a year or a year and a half. And I got to the point where I didn't even like who I was becoming. And um, I couldn't relate to him in any form of kindness or anything because I was holding on to this anger. I hadn't told him about it. I hadn't told him how I felt. I was just hanging on to it. And it was festering into this way bigger issue to the
Yeah.
point where it was actually changing. I'm sure it was changing things even in my mind, like neurologically. And it got to the point where it's like I hated who I was becoming. And, with the help of my counselor, with the help of, walking through forgiveness and so many steps of healing, I was able to, communicate it and release it and walk through that. But, that was how it played out for me when I held in my anger. It
Yeah.
didn't just stay anger. It morphed into so many other things. And as you were talking, another thought came to me is because since then, I was just like, you know what, I'm not going to hold on to anger anymore,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
I have found now that, and I feel like it, in some ways, it's just as equally unhealthy, and you can give me your perspective. But now I feel like, in my head, I'm like, I shouldn't hold on to this anger, right? And I almost instinctively, immediately when something happens, let that anger out immediately, which, um, instead of like the scriptures say, be slow to become angry, be quick to listen, and all of those things where, well, if I'm just quickly in the moment, as soon as I'm getting angry, I'm expressing that anger and I'm expressing that disappointment or frustration. I think that's equally as devastating and unhealthy. What are your thoughts on that?
My mother had a great expression for this. She said, "Keep your words soft and sweet because one day you may have to eat them."
Mm, right.
Right. Um, and then I think of the Psalms. or actually Proverbs. A gentle word turns away wrath, and a harsh word stirs up anger,
Right.
right? By responding calmly, which is part of healthy anger, it's okay to feel.
Right.
In fact, it's important we feel.
Mhm.
Anger is not a bad thing.
Right.
You shouldn't be trying to stop ever feeling angry
Right.
because it's the same as trying to stop ever feeling sad
Right.
or stop ever feeling afraid. You
Mhm.
can strive for that, but it's not going to happen, right? We're human beings, and sadness and fear are not negative
Right.
emotions because we need to grieve.
Mhm.
And sometimes fear actually protects us. Anger is a response to a trauma. Might be a little trauma, like somebody cutting you off in traffic,
Mhm.
or it might be a big trauma, like somebody hitting you. But it's a response to trauma. And so we have to process it.
Mhm.
And if we reply calmly, right? And calmly isn't holding in the anger and like tensing up with it and then, oh, it's okay. You didn't, I forgive you for what you did. No, it's okay. That actually really ticked me off. Why did that happen? Or
Right.
am I misinterpreting this? Right?
Mhm.
Because
Right.
that's a possibility. A lot of times when we get angry, it's for something we misinterpreted something that was happening.
Right.
Mhm.
That's true.
So part of that slow to anger is taking a breath,
Mhm.
thinking it through, assuming the best, speaking calmly into it.
Mhm.
Like, for example, I was actually really angry last night. I was angry. Um, I wanted to shave my head, my face, because I knew this was going to be recorded. And I wanted to look at least presentable and not like some hillbilly hiding in the back of your house. And so I shaved and my razor almost died, but I managed to get it done. I plugged it in and left it in the bathroom. A little while later, I had to go back and go to the bathroom, and I found my razor plugged with hair, like absolutely, like it looked like somebody stuffed a raccoon in one end of my razor, and all the hair was black and gray. So I'm like, it's not one of the kids. Doug did this,
Oh no.
and I was like, he took my razor and did this to it and left it. What the heck? I was like really upset. And so I come back into the room and I vented to Connie, and Connie's like, do you want a lynch mob? What do you want? I'm like, I'll just talk to him about it tomorrow. So I get up this morning and I go out to make breakfast and I see Doug walking around outside. I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. So I go out and I'm like, Doug, did you shave last night? He said, yeah. Why? I said, because that was my razor. And he looked embarrassed and said, I thought it was Ben's because Ben is always stealing mine. And I'm sorry. I'm like, it's okay. I forgive you. He said, I'll go clean it out. He said, I'll go clean it out and make sure it's all good. And I'm like, thank you very much. And I went back inside.
Mhm.
I was angry. I processed. I spoke calmly. There was no escalation.
Right.
Right? I could have found my razor, took it, gone up to your room, banged on the door. What the heck is this?
Right.
And that would I've been, you know, in the right for outrage? Well, maybe not to that point, but yeah, I mean, obviously he used my razor without asking and left a mess and stuff.
Yeah.
But it would have been gross overreaction.
Yeah.
But it was an option, right?
Mhm.
So I made it healthy anger.
Right.
I feel like I ranted a bit there, but yeah.
That's okay. Something I didn't know about is all good. Being vulnerable and honest. It's all good.
Yeah. And it's all good. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I talked to Doug. Doug's fine with it, and he knows that's mine. He actually he's like, actually, I have a complaint. Your razor was very low power. And I said, well, yeah, that's why it was on the charger.
Oh, and that's the thing about, with sharing even our spaces, right? Is learning the new rules, learning the new boundaries and space allowances and all those kind of things. I think there's going to be a learning curve for sure when
Yeah,
it
on
comes to that as
everybody's
well.
part. Yeah.
For sure.
And again, this is like a perfect example of managing our expectations, managing our boundaries,
Hmm.
managing our anger. Because there's an anger, like I said, it's such a sliding scale of it. It goes from mild annoyance,
Hmm.
right, to like I turn around and I make some sausages for everyone. I go to get Connie, I come back, all the sausages are gone. Me and Connie didn't get any. I'm like, hmm, mild annoyance. I'm not gonna, call a family meeting over no
Did that
sausages.
actually happen, or are you just using a fake
I'm
example?
just using a that didn't actually happen.
Oh,
When
okay.
I cook breakfast for me and Connie, I take it away immediately.
Okay.
No,
I could honestly picture that happening. That's why I'm like, did it actually
that
happen?
me too. I could. That's why I used it, is because that is a plausible event. But no, like from mild annoyance to something major, like if I had an emergency and the car's blocked in because
Right,
somebody came home last night and didn't think,
right,
and I'm losing my mind trying to run around and find whose car it is and to get the car out of there so I can get out or something. That hasn't happened, but it's been a thought in my head a few times.
right.
Um, so anger is such a broad scale, but
Hmm.
if we turn around and we look at each other with grace,
Hmm.
assume the best,
Yeah,
watch for triggers, be mindful of our own physicality where we're at,
yeah,
we can avoid a complication. There is something I wanted to mention though. You were talking about, like what you were talking about with the miscarriage and the held in anger,
yeah.
and that's neuroplasticity.
Hmm.
Neuroplasticity is we form pathways in our brain. A happens, B is the response. The more that happens, the more it becomes like second nature in our brain, right? And so offshoots from that happen too. If, for example, every time I get up, I go into the kitchen, nobody's done the dishes, I get upset.
Yeah.
Every time that happens, it becomes almost like a pathway in my brain. I get up, I'm going to go into the kitchen, I'm going to be angry. Sometime by a week, 2 weeks down the road, I've not even seen the kitchen yet. I'm already angry,
Hmm.
right? We form pathways in our brain.
Right,
And the more they're used, the more they go from like goat trail to path to 5 lane highway, right?
right.
It becomes a more permanent structure. A year and a half of holding in that anger means that every little thing irritates that pathway,
Hmm.
slides down that pathway. Every little thing that Doug did
Right.
reinforced that pathway.
Yeah,
And it becomes very hard to break that after a while, to the
yeah,
point where you need like talk therapy to recognize the problem. And even then, now you have to be aware that path exists,
yeah.
right? So
Hmm.
that's what I'm talking about with triggers, right?
Yeah.
Using the dishes example, if I go into the kitchen, it's clean, yay. Maybe and maybe I'm triggered by the dishes. Okay, I'll have a calm conversation with everybody. Then a week down the road, I come in, there's one dirty dish left out. I'm like,
Hmm.
no, I'm not going to get upset. It's one dish, right? Let's
Yeah.
assume the best. Let's move on from here,
Hmm.
right? I'm not going to let that be a trigger.
Right.
But you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, for sure. And the thing about the neuroplasticity thing is that it can be reversed.
Yes, you can.
Obviously with lots of work and recognizing, acknowledging what's happening. And like you said, recognizing those triggers and doing a lot of that management work of the anger. because, I no longer have that same anger associated with that situation in my life. And I've done a lot of work on that. So don't, like, for those who are listening, don't feel like if you've created these pathways in your brain and you have these instant reactions to anger, that you're going to be struggling with this your whole life. The whole point in us sharing this today is to bring awareness to this issue and to help you understand
Yeah.
that you can change this. And there are many different things and strategies and tools that you can use to help manage your anger. Walter, did you want to give any last thoughts before we close up for today?
I did want to like one last thing, building on what you just said, going back to the idea of them being trails in your brain. Any trail you see out there, if it's left alone, will overgrow to the point where you'll never knew it was there.
Hmm.
Even highways, if left alone long enough, the asphalt breaks apart, new growth comes in, and you'll never know the highway was there. It might
Hmm.
take a little longer, but nothing is permanent except for Jesus.
Right. But in that regard, when we were talking about anger, how would you let that pathway be not like, how would you not use that pathway unless you're replacing it with something else, right?
Yeah, nature abhors a vacuum. So that we go into a little bit more when we're talking about conflict resolution
Okay.
and things like that. Um, this is an 8-part program, and
Hmm.
everything we talked about here is part one. It's
Right.
not even all of part one. It's like 3 pages of part one
Right.
and a little bit of part two.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, your program that you created is absolutely incredible, and I see so much. I actually
Well,
wanted
thank
to,
you.
as you're launching your program in September, and I'm actually going to be your first student because
Oh,
I,
cool.
just so you know, I haven't told you, I haven't registered yet, but I am going to be one of your first students because I absolutely need to go through your program because I recognize within myself some loose ends that need to be tied up. So. Um, I fully endorse your program and what you're doing, and I encourage anyone else out there who, is struggling in this area of anger and how to manage it and how to, really operate in a healthy way when it comes to this emotion of anger. Consider
Mm,
looking into this and checking it out because it is, I believe, going to change your life. And so thank you for joining us today. And
my
we will
pleasure.
be back in a couple weeks and we will be sharing more about some of the calming techniques that you can use when managing your anger. So thank you, Walter, for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Laura, for having me.
You're welcome.